20 years alone. The cowboy's unexpected love. Jack Thompson woke up before the sun, as he always did. The sky was still a soft, dark blue, and the only sounds were the gentle rustling of the grass and the distant call of a hawk. He stretched his arms, feeling the stiffness in his back from another long day yesterday. Living alone on the Wyoming prairie for 20 years had taught him discipline and patience, but it also left its marks on his body. His hands were rough and calloused, his face weathered from endless hours under the sun and wind. Jack lived on a ranch that had belonged to his family for generations. It was a wide stretch of land, filled with rolling hills, open fields, and a few small groves of trees that provided shade for the cattle during the hot summer months. There were fences that ran for miles, barns that had seen better days, and a small, simple house where he spent his nights. The house wasn't much, but it was his. It had a wooden porch that creaked with every step, a fireplace that warmed him in the bitter winter, and a kitchen where he made simple meals. Over the years, he had learned to fix anything that broke, to mend fences, repair barns, and tend to the land without needing help from anyone else. For Jack, life had always been about routine. He woke up early, fed the cattle, checked the fences, repaired anything broken, and ended the day with a quiet meal by the fire. Sometimes he rode out on horseback across the prairie, listening to the wind and the sound of hooves against the soft earth. He enjoyed the solitude, the endless sky, and the feeling of freedom that came with living so far away from the busy towns. But there was also a loneliness that never quite left him. 20 years ago, a tragic accident had taken his wife and daughter. Since that day, Jack had chosen to live alone, avoiding the closeness of others, afraid of losing anyone again. Despite the silence of his life, Jack had company. His dog, Ranger, was always by his side. Ranger was a loyal companion, a constant presence that offered comfort without asking for much in return. The dog followed Jack everywhere, through the fields to the barn and even into the house at night. Jack talked to Ranger as he worked, sometimes sharing memories from the past or simply speaking aloud about his day. It wasn't the same as having a family, but it was enough to make the long days pass more peacefully. One chilly morning, Jack saddled his horse and rode out to inspect the northern fences. The prairie was covered in a thin layer of frost, and the air was crisp and cold. As he rode, he remembered the days when his wife Claire had joined him on these rides, her laughter echoing across the fields. He shook his head, trying to push away the sadness that sometimes overwhelmed him. Those memories were a part of him, but dwelling on them could make the loneliness heavier. Checking the fence posts one by one, Jack noticed that a section near the creek had been weakened by recent rain. The wood was rotting and several posts were leaning dangerously. He knew it would take hours to fix, and he would have to work carefully to ensure the cattle didn't wander off. Jack was used to this kind of work, and he had spent years learning how to repair fences with precision and care. He set to work, hammering the post back into place, tying the wires tight, and making sure everything was secure. The work was hard, but it kept his mind occupied and reminded him that he was capable, even after years of solitude. By midday, Jack returned to the house, tired but satisfied that the fences were repaired. He cooked himself a simple lunch, a piece of bread, some cheese, and a cup of strong coffee. Sitting by the window, he watched the sun climb higher in the sky, casting golden light across the fields. He often thought about the small town nearby, wondering what life would be like if he joined in the social events, if he talked to people more. But he always shook off the thought. He was comfortable here, in his routines and in his isolation. People in town respected him, but they also knew not to expect much from him socially. Jack liked it that way. Evenings were the hardest. After the chores were done, and the sun sank behind the hills, Jack would sit alone by the fireplace. He sometimes read books, letters from friends long gone, or simply stared into the flames listening to the crackle of the fire. He missed the sound of laughter, the warmth of a shared meal, and the simple companionship of another human. But over the years, he had grown accustomed to the quiet. Loneliness, he realized, was not always painful. It could also be a companion, a familiar friend that never left. Jack had moments of reflection too. He often thought about the life he could have had, the family he had lost, and the years that had passed so quietly. Sometimes he rode to the edge of the property and looked out over the endless prairie, feeling both the beauty and the emptiness of it. The sky stretched endlessly above him. The wind whispered through the grass, and the cattle grazed quietly in the distance. In those moments, Jack felt both the weight of his solitude and the freedom it gave him. Ranger would sit beside him, ears perked, watching the horizon. Jack patted his faithful dog and whispered, "We'll get through another day, boy. Just us." The dog leaned into him, and for a moment Jack felt a small comfort, a connection that made the vast emptiness a little less heavy. Jack also had a small routine for the weekends. He would visit the town's general store for supplies, exchanging polite greetings with the shopkeeper and a few neighbors. Though he didn't talk much, people admired his dedication to his land and the quiet dignity he carried. Some tried to engage him in conversations or invite him to gatherings, but Jack always politely declined. He had grown used to solitude, and after so many years it had become a part of him. Despite this, Jack was not without dreams. Sometimes, when he looked at the stars on clear nights, he imagined what it would be like to have someone beside him again. He wondered about love, friendship, and family, not as something he expected to find, but as a quiet hope that maybe life still held surprises. For now, he focused on the land, the animals, and the small routines that kept him grounded. On this particular morning, after finishing his chores and lunch, Jack walked out to the barn, checking on the cattle once more. The sunlight had softened, the wind had calmed, and the prairie seemed to glow with a warm golden light. He leaned against the barn door, taking a deep breath of the fresh air. He felt the years of solitude pressing around him, but he also felt a sense of resilience. 20 years alone had shaped him into a man who could survive anything, who could endure the harshness of the land and the silence of the world. As the day went on, Jack continued with his work, repairing a broken gate and mending a small section of fence that had been damaged by the wind. He worked quietly, methodically, and with care. It was a life of simplicity, a life that many might call lonely, but it was his life, and he had learned to make peace with it. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, painting the prairie with shades of orange and pink, Jack felt a quiet satisfaction. The land was safe, the cattle were secure, and his home was warm. Ranger lay at his feet, eyes closing in the fading light. Jack watched the horizon, feeling the calm of the evening settle over him. This was the life he had chosen, the life he had built, and even in the quiet, there was a certain beauty. In the stillness of the prairie, Jack knew that tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, and more silence. But he also knew he could face it all, just as he had for 20 years. And in that moment, as the stars began to appear one by one in the vast night sky, he felt a quiet peace, a deep connection to the land, and a small, unspoken hope that life might still have something unexpected in store for him. It was a morning much like any other when Jack Thompson noticed something unusual. A storm had passed the night before, leaving the land wet and muddy. As he rode out to check the northern fence line, he realized that the creek had overflowed, weakening several posts and washing away part of the fencing. The cattle were safe for now, but if the fence wasn't repaired quickly, they could wander off and cause trouble. Jack knew he could fix it himself, as he had done countless times before. But the task was large, and it would take several hours. As he was measuring the damaged posts and planning the repair, he heard a voice calling from the edge of the field. "Excuse me!" "Are you Jack Thompson?" Jack turned sharply, his hand instinctively moving toward the saddle horn. He was not used to visitors, and the sound of a friendly voice was startling after so many years of solitude. At the edge of the field stood a young woman, wearing work boots, jeans, and a wide-brimmed hat. Her hair was pulled back into a loose braid, and there was a determined look in her eyes. "Yes, I'm Jack," he replied cautiously, his voice steady but wary. "Can I help you?" "My name's Emily," she said, stepping closer. "I'm traveling through Wyoming for work, and I noticed your fence by the creek. Looks like the storm did quite a bit of damage." "I know it's none of my business, but I can help if you want." Jack studied her for a moment, unsure. It had been 20 years since anyone had offered him help like this. Most people gave advice from a distance, or shook their heads and walked away. But something about Emily's confidence, and the way she carried herself made him pause.
I appreciate it, but it's not exactly easy work, Jack said. You'd be wasting your time.
It's muddy, heavy, and dangerous. Best to leave it to me. Emily smiled faintly, not in a teasing way, but with a warmth that seemed to soften the edges of Jack's suspicion.
I'm not afraid of a little hard work.
I can handle it. Jack hesitated, then finally nodded.
All right, but I warn you, it won't be quick or easy.
The two of them rode to the creek together. Jack showed her the damaged posts, explaining which ones needed replacing and how the fence wires should be tightened. Emily listened carefully, asking questions when she didn't understand something, but following his instructions closely. Jack was surprised at how quickly she picked up on his methods. As they worked side by side, the air filled with the sounds of hammering, snapping wire, and the occasional murmur of conversation. Jack found himself talking more than he usually did, about the storm, the cattle, and even small stories about the ranch. Emily listened patiently, nodding and sometimes adding her own observations. She didn't interrupt or judge. She simply shared her thoughts in a calm and practical way. By midday, the fence was partially repaired, and Jack felt a sense of relief. He had not realized how much extra help would ease the task. Emily, covered in mud and sweat, laughed when a loose wire snapped back at her arm, leaving a red mark. Jack chuckled quietly, something he hadn't done in a long time. Her laughter was light, easy, and contagious. "You're not too bad at this," he said, shaking his head. "Most people can't even hold a post correctly." Emily grinned. "I may be new to ranch work, but I'm not helpless. Besides, I had a teacher." She gave a playful nod toward Jack, and he couldn't help but smile at her confidence. After finishing the main repairs, Jack offered Emily some lunch. He had packed sandwiches and a flask of coffee, simple fare, but it was enough for two people. They ate quietly at first, watching the cattle graze near the creek. Then Emily spoke of her travels, the small town she had seen, and the people she had met along the way. Jack listened, curious despite himself. He had not spoken much with anyone outside the town for years, and her stories were different from the usual mundane chatter. They carried life, movement, and warmth. As the afternoon wore on, Jack began to notice small things he hadn't paid attention to before. The way Emily's hands worked quickly and efficiently, the focus in her eyes, the patience she had with both the fence and the animals. He found himself respecting her in ways he hadn't expected, and yet there was something more than respect. A strange curiosity, a desire to know more about her life, her thoughts, and her heart. By the time they finished the repairs, the sun was low in the sky, painting the prairie in shades of gold and orange. Jack was tired, as he always was after a long day of work, but he also felt an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. For the first time in years, he had someone to share the day with, someone who laughed at small mistakes and offered help without asking for anything in return. Emily, sensing that Jack was still wary of her presence, decided to leave before evening. She thanked him for allowing her to help and said she would be passing through the area in a few days. Jack nodded, feeling a strange hesitation at the thought of her leaving. He wasn't used to attachments. Not anymore. That night, as Jack sat by the fire in his small house, Ranger curled at his feet, he reflected on the day. There was something about Emily that stayed in his mind, the way she moved, the sound of her voice, and her easy confidence. He realized that he hadn't felt this sense of connection in decades. Not since the loss of his family. The thought was both comforting and unsettling. He wasn't sure if he wanted to admit it, but a small spark of hope flickered in his chest. Over the next few days, Jack found himself thinking about Emily often. He noticed little things on the ranch that reminded him of her. The way she had carefully tied the wire, the way she had laughed at her mistake, even the sound of boots on muddy ground. The routine of solitude felt different now, filled with memories of someone he barely knew, yet who had already made a mark on his life. When Emily returned as she had promised, Jack felt a mixture of anticipation and unease. She arrived in the morning, carrying tools and wearing her work clothes again. "Ready to finish the fence?" she asked, smiling. Jack nodded, though he found himself unusually tongue-tied. "Yes." Working together again felt natural, though Jack noticed his own feelings shifting. He found himself glancing at her more often, noticing the small details, the way sunlight caught her hair, the determination in her hands, and the way she encouraged him when he grew tired. It was as if the years of isolation had dulled his senses, and now, slowly, they were awakening. As the day progressed, their conversation grew deeper. Emily asked about Jack's life, his experiences on the ranch, and his memories of the past. Jack, hesitant at first, began to share stories he had never told anyone else. He spoke of his wife and daughter, of the accident that had changed his life, and of the years he had spent alone. Emily listened quietly, never interrupting or judging, her presence offering comfort simply by being there. By late afternoon, the fence was fully repaired, the creek was contained, the cattle were safe, and the ranch was secure once again. Jack felt a sense of accomplishment, but also something more, a budding connection, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He realized that Emily's visit had done more than help with the fence. It had reminded him of the possibility of companionship, of trust, and of unexpected joy. Before leaving, Emily looked at Jack with a gentle smile. "You work hard, Jack. You care about this land, and it shows. I hope you don't mind me saying, it's inspiring." Jack felt a strange warmth in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades. "Thank you," he said quietly. I appreciate that." As she rode away, Jack watched her disappear over the horizon. For the first time in 20 years, he didn't feel entirely alone. There was a small, unspoken connection, a possibility that life might hold more than just routine and solitude. That evening, as he sat by the fire, Ranger resting at his side, Jack allowed himself to imagine a life that included another person, not just in passing, but as a presence that could bring warmth, laughter, and maybe even love. The night was calm, the prairie bathed in silver moonlight. Jack sat silently, thinking of Emily's smile, her kindness, and her courage. The world outside his ranch was vast, unpredictable, and full of unknowns, but for the first time in many years, Jack felt a quiet hope that the unexpected could happen, that life could surprise him in ways he hadn't dared to imagine. And in that still, peaceful moment, he realized something he had forgotten, that even after 20 years of solitude, a new chapter could begin, quietly, without warning, and change everything. After the fence was repaired and the storm damage fixed, Jack Thompson found that Emily's presence had left a lasting impression. He had spent 20 years accustomed to silence, to the wind as his companion, and to Ranger's steady loyalty. But something about Emily's visit lingered in his mind like the first warm sunlight after a long winter. Even while working alone on the ranch the next day, he found his thoughts drifting to her. The way she laughed, the way she handled the work, and the strange comfort of talking with someone who listened without judgment. A few days later, Emily returned just as she had promised. This time she brought a small bag of supplies, tools, nails, and a roll of wire. She had noticed another section of the fence that was weak and wanted to help Jack reinforce it before it became a bigger problem. When Jack saw her riding up the dirt path, he felt an unfamiliar flutter in his chest. He realized that he looked forward to her visits more than he wanted to admit. "Morning, Jack," Emily called, climbing off her horse. "I thought I'd come back before the next storm hits." "Looks like we've got more work to do." Jack nodded, feeling a little awkward. "Yes."
We do. I wasn't expecting you so soon, but
"I'm glad you came." He didn't usually talk like this, and it surprised him that he actually meant it. Together, they walked to the weakened section of the fence. As they worked, Emily asked questions about the ranch, the cattle, and Jack's routines. Jack answered, sometimes with long explanations, sometimes with short ones, but he found that he no longer minded talking. Emily listened patiently, genuinely interested, and occasionally offered suggestions. It was different from any conversation Jack had had in years. There was no hurry, no judgment, and no expectation, just a simple exchange of thoughts. Emily also asked about Jack's life, though carefully. She didn't press for personal details, but her curiosity was gentle. encouraging him to open up in ways he hadn't in decades. Jack told her small stories about the ranch, about how he had learned to repair fences, care for the cattle, and survive the harsh winters. As he spoke, he noticed how natural it felt to share pieces of his life with someone who seemed to care. It was a small, unfamiliar warmth, but it was welcome. During lunch, Jack offered her some of his food: bread, cheese, and a thermos of coffee. They ate quietly, watching the cattle graze nearby. Emily spoke about her travels, sharing light stories of towns she had visited and people she had met. Jack listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes simply enjoying her company. He realized that the sound of another person's voice, speaking casually and warmly, could make the wide, empty prairie feel less lonely. As the days passed, Emily's visits became more frequent. She helped Jack repair fences, mend barns, and even move hay bales. At first, Jack had worried about losing his independence, but he soon saw that having someone around did not diminish his ability, it enhanced it. The work went faster, and even the heaviest tasks became easier. But beyond that, her presence brought a quiet joy that Jack had not felt in many years. One afternoon, while taking a break under the shade of a tree, Emily asked, "Jack, do you ever miss people?"
I mean, family, friends? Jack hesitated, staring at the horizon.
The question was simple, yet it stirred memories he had long tried to keep locked away.
I do.
He said slowly. I miss them every day, but I don't let myself dwell on it. Life has its own way, and you learn to live with what you have.
Emily nodded gently.
I understand. But even when life is hard, it helps to share it sometimes, even with someone you just met. Jack looked at her and felt a small, unfamiliar sensation, a sense of trust. He realized that in all the years of solitude, he had built walls so high that very few could climb them. Emily, however, had done so without effort, without asking for anything in return. She had entered his life quietly, respectfully, and had already begun to chip away at his defenses. Over the next few weeks, Jack found himself opening up more and more. He told Emily about his wife, Claire, and their daughter, Lily. He shared memories of family dinners, laughter in the kitchen, and long rides on horseback across the prairie. Sometimes his voice faltered and his eyes misted over, but Emily never made him feel weak. She simply listened, nodding, and occasionally placed a hand on his shoulder, a small gesture of comfort that Jack had almost forgotten existed. Emily also shared parts of her life with Jack. She told him about her childhood in a small town far away, about struggles she had faced and overcome, and about dreams she still held for the future. Jack found himself fascinated by her stories. She was strong, independent, and practical. Yet she also carried a kindness and empathy that reminded him of the people he had loved and lost. One day, as they were working together to repair a section of the barn roof, Emily slipped on the wooden plank and nearly fell. Jack caught her just in time, holding her steady. Their eyes met, and for a moment, neither spoke. Jack felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of concern, relief, and something deeper, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Emily smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Thanks, Jack," she said softly. He nodded, his heart beating faster than he realized.
Be careful, he replied. There was an unspoken understanding between them now, a growing connection that neither wanted to name, but both felt deeply.
As the sun set that evening, Jack and Emily sat on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the sky change colors. The prairie seemed alive with possibility, and Jack felt a sense of peace that had eluded him for decades. He realized that he looked forward to Emily's visits not just for the work she helped with, but for the companionship, the laughter, and the warmth she brought into his life.
Ranger, lying nearby, lifted his head and barked softly as if acknowledging the change in his owner.
Jack smiled at his dog, feeling the strange mix of fear and excitement that came with the realization that his life might be shifting. He was cautious, of course. 20 years alone had taught him to protect his heart, but he also felt a spark of hope. In the days that followed, their friendship grew stronger. They shared meals, repaired fences, and rode horses across the prairie together. Jack began to notice small habits of Emily's that he liked. The way she hummed softly while working, the gentle care she showed for the animals, and the way she encouraged him when he grew tired or frustrated. He found himself thinking about her when she wasn't there, wondering what she was doing and looking forward to the next visit. One afternoon, as they rested under a tree after a long day of work, Emily asked, "Jack, have you ever thought about having someone live here? Permanently?" Jack was startled by the question. He had spent 20 years alone, and the thought of sharing his life so closely with someone was almost unimaginable. Yet, as he looked at her, at the strength, kindness, and warmth in her eyes, he realized that he wanted her presence in his life more than he had expected. He hesitated, then said slowly, I don't know. I've been alone for so long, it's hard to imagine it. But maybe someday. Emily smiled softly, sensing his uncertainty. No rush, Jack. We'll take it one step at a time. I just wanted you to know I'm here, and I care. That evening after Emily left, Jack sat by the fire thinking about the day. His life had been quiet, predictable, and safe, but now it felt like the prairie itself had shifted. The work was the same, the cattle were the same, and the land stretched endlessly as it always had. But there was a new element now, a presence that brought warmth, laughter, and companionship. For the first time in 20 years, Jack felt that his solitude might be ending, slowly and naturally, not with a sudden change, but with small, meaningful steps. He realized that life could still surprise him. It had taken 20 years, but someone had arrived who didn't demand anything, didn't rush him, and didn't judge his past. Emily had entered his life quietly, patiently, and had shown him that trust and friendship could grow even after years of isolation. And Jack, for the first time in a long time, allowed himself to believe that love, too, might be possible. As the stars appeared in the clear night sky, Jack Thompson sat quietly on the porch, Ranger at his side, and felt a sense of anticipation mixed with peace. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that life was no longer just his own. For the first time in decades, he was sharing it with someone else, and that was enough to make the long, empty years of solitude feel a little less heavy. Summer was in full swing on Jack Thompson's ranch, and the long days brought with them both hard work and quiet beauty. The prairie was alive with tall grasses swaying in the wind, cattle grazing lazily in the sunlight, and the distant mountains standing guard over the land. For the first time in years, Jack noticed the world around him with a different perspective. It wasn't just the land or the animals that mattered. It was the presence of Emily, who had become a constant in his days. Over the past weeks, Emily's visits had grown more frequent, and their relationship had slowly shifted from simple companionship to something deeper. Though neither had yet named it, they worked together efficiently, sharing laughter, stories, and even comfortable silences. Jack began to realize that he looked forward to her arrival each morning, and that the empty spaces of his ranch no longer felt quite so lonely. One afternoon, after repairing a broken gate and guiding the cattle back into their enclosure, Emily suggested they take a short break. She led Jack to a small grove of trees near the creek, where sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating a patchwork of light and shadow on the ground. They sat down on a fallen log, both exhausted from the day's work, but content in each other's company. "You work harder than anyone I've ever met," Emily said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "This ranch, it's not easy, and yet you manage it all yourself." Jack shrugged modestly. "I've done it for years. It's just what I know. It keeps me busy, keeps me alive, I guess." Emily looked at him, her eyes softening.
I can tell it also keeps you from being alone, but maybe not in the way you think.
Jack's hands paused mid-motion as he tightened a piece of wire. Her words surprised him, and for a moment he didn't respond. He had spent 20 years learning to shield his heart, convincing himself that solitude was safety. And yet, he couldn't deny the truth in what she said. Emily had entered his life quietly, and her presence had begun to awaken feelings he thought had been buried forever. "I suppose you're right," Jack admitted finally. "Being alone has been comfortable in its own way, safe, but it's also been lonely, even if I didn't always feel it." Emily reached over and touched his hand lightly.
Lonely doesn't mean weak, Jack.
"It just means there's space in your life for something new, someone who cares."
Jack looked at her hand,
then into her eyes, and felt a rush of emotion.
It was a mixture of fear, anticipation, and something he couldn't quite name. He realized that he had developed feelings for Emily. Feelings he hadn't allowed himself to experience in decades. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. Over the next few days, Jack found himself reflecting on his life in ways he hadn't before. He remembered the loss of his wife and daughter, the empty years that followed, and the walls he had built to protect himself. He understood now that those walls had kept him safe, but they had also kept him from experiencing joy, companionship, and love. And now, with Emily in his life, those walls felt less necessary, though the fear of losing someone again still lingered. One evening, after a long day of moving hay bales and repairing fences, Jack and Emily sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the hills. The sky was painted with warm oranges, pinks, and purples, and the air was filled with the soft chirping of crickets and the distant lowing of cattle. Jack felt a quiet peace, but also a growing tension in his chest, a tension born of unspoken feelings, of emotions he wasn't sure he could fully express. "Emily," he began, hesitating. "There's something I've been thinking about, something I haven't felt in a long time." Emily turned to him, curiosity in her eyes. "What is it?"
I think
"I've realized I care about you, more than I expected to care about anyone." "And I'm afraid." Emily reached out and gently placed her hand over his.
Afraid of what? Afraid of losing someone again, Jack admitted. Afraid of opening up after 20 years of being alone.
"Afraid that if I let myself feel this, it could hurt me."
Emily squeezed his hand reassuringly.
"I understand, and you don't have to rush anything. Feelings are meant to grow naturally. We'll take it one day at a time. I'm not going anywhere, Jack. I promise." Her words brought a sense of calm to Jack's racing heart. He realized that love didn't have to arrive all at once, and that he could allow himself to feel it slowly, without fear of immediate consequences. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to imagine a life that included someone else, a life filled with laughter, shared work, and companionship. In the days that followed, their bond deepened. Jack found himself sharing more of his past, opening up about memories he had long kept buried. He spoke of his wife Claire and their daughter Lily, their birthdays, the holidays, the small moments of joy that had once filled his home. Emily listened with empathy, never rushing him, never judging. Her presence made the memories less painful, and slowly, Jack began to feel that he could honor the past while still looking forward to the future. Emily, too, shared pieces of her life, her childhood, her struggles, and her dreams. Jack was fascinated by her resilience and strength, and he admired the way she approached life with both practicality and kindness. He realized that she had become more than a helper on the ranch. She had become a friend, a confidant, and someone he trusted completely. One afternoon, while checking the cattle near the edge of the property, Jack noticed a young calf struggling to stand. He and Emily rushed to help, lifting and supporting the calf until it could walk on its own. The teamwork and shared concern for the animal brought them even closer. Jack found himself laughing and joking with Emily in a way he hadn't in years, the sound of their combined laughter echoing across the fields. As the summer days passed, Jack also began to notice the small, subtle ways Emily cared for him. She would leave water and snacks for him during long work sessions, tidy up his kitchen without being asked, and offer gentle words of encouragement when he grew tired. These gestures were quiet, but they carried a warmth and intimacy that touched Jack deeply. He realized that she was not only helping him with work, but also nurturing a connection that had been missing from his life for decades. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day, Emily looked at Jack thoughtfully. "Jack, have you ever thought about what life could be like if you let someone in fully? Not just for a day or a week, but as a part of your life?" Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had thought about it, of course, but the question made it real in a way that scared him. I have, he admitted, but it's hard. After 20 years alone, it's hard to imagine letting someone stay, to let someone care for me the way I've cared for myself all these years. It doesn't have to be perfect, Jack. It just has to be real. And I think you're ready, even if you don't believe it yet.
Jack looked into her eyes and felt a swell of emotion. He realized that his feelings for Emily had grown beyond friendship and that he wanted to embrace this new chapter of life despite the fear and uncertainty.
For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope, not just for work completed or cattle safe, but for companionship, trust, and love. That night, as Jack lay in bed, he thought about Emily and the days they had spent together. He remembered the laughter, the shared labor, the quiet moments under the trees, and the simple joy of having someone to talk to. He realized that love didn't have to arrive suddenly or perfectly. It could grow slowly, quietly, like the prairie grass under the sun. He thought about the future, not just the work on the ranch, but the possibility of building a life alongside someone who cared for him. It was a future he hadn't dared to imagine, but now, with Emily's presence in his life, it felt possible. And for the first time in 20 years, Jack Thompson allowed himself to believe that he could love again, without fear and without regret. The days on the ranch were warmer now, and the summer sun cast a golden glow over the wide fields. Jack Thompson had learned long ago to read the land, to understand the cattle, the weather, and the subtle rhythms of life on the prairie. But now, there was another rhythm to his days, one he hadn't known for 20 years. It was the rhythm of companionship, of laughter, and of shared work. Of Emily, who had quietly become part of his life. Their mornings began with routines that had once been solitary. Jack would rise early, feed the cattle, and check fences, but now Emily was always there, ready to help. She moved through the ranch with ease, carrying tools, carrying water, or simply walking beside him as he rode across the fields. At first, Jack had been cautious, guarding his heart against attachment, but over time he realized that her presence did not weaken him. It strengthened him. Life was no longer just about survival. It was about sharing, about connection, about joy. One morning, after tending to the cattle near the creek, Jack and Emily sat on the edge of a small hill overlooking the ranch. The wind blew softly through the grass, carrying with it the scent of wildflowers and the distant sound of a hawk calling. Jack watched Emily as she carefully sketched something in a notebook, a habit he had noticed she enjoyed. "You really enjoy drawing, don't you?" Jack asked, curiosity breaking his silence. Emily looked up and smiled. "I do. It helps me see the world differently, helps me remember little details that might otherwise be forgotten."
Jack nodded thoughtfully. "I never had that patience."
"I've always been about work, about getting things done." Emily closed her notebook and looked at him. "There's nothing wrong with that, Jack. But maybe now you can see life differently, too. Sometimes it's the little things, the quiet moments, that matter most." Jack felt a warm glow in his chest. He realized she was right. For 20 years, he had focused on work, on routine, and on survival. But now he was learning that life could also be about laughter, companionship, and shared experiences. Emily had shown him that, simply by being there, by caring, and by patiently allowing him to rediscover his heart. As the weeks went by, their connection deepened further. Jack began to share more about his past, recounting stories of his childhood, his parents, and his siblings. Emily listened intently, often asking questions that encouraged him to reflect on the lessons he had learned and the strength he had gained. In turn, Emily shared her dreams and hopes, revealing a desire for stability and a home where she could belong. Jack listened, fascinated by her resilience and her gentle wisdom. One evening, after a long day of work, Jack and Emily sat by the porch fire, drinking coffee and watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky. The prairie was quiet. The world seemingly paused, and the only sound was the crackling of the fire and the soft breathing of Ranger at their feet. Jack turned to Emily, feeling a surge of emotion he could no longer ignore. "Emily," he began, his voice steady but filled with feeling, "these past few months, they've changed my life. I never thought I'd feel this way again, not after everything I've lost. But you've made me see that life can still be beautiful, even after the darkest times." Emily's eyes softened. "Jack, I'm glad. I wanted to show you that you're not alone, and that it's okay to care again, to trust again, to hope again." Jack reached for her hand, holding it gently.
"I care about you, Emily, more than I thought possible."
And I want us to share this life together, not just in passing, but truly. I want you here with me, on this ranch in my life." Emily's smile was warm, radiant, and filled with emotion. "Jack, I feel the same way. I have never met someone who values life, work, and love in the same way you do. I want to be here with you, if you'll have me."
The weight of 20 years of solitude seemed to lift from Jack's shoulders.
He realized that this was what he had been waiting for, even if he hadn't known it. A partner, a friend, and a love that could grow naturally, patiently, and with care. That night, as they sat by the fire, he felt a sense of completion, a feeling that life had finally offered him a second chance. In the days that followed, Jack and Emily worked side by side, their partnership growing stronger. Together, they repaired barns, mended fences, and cared for the cattle. Jack noticed how Emily anticipated his needs, how she encouraged him when he grew tired, and how her laughter brightened even the hardest tasks. Life on the ranch became a shared adventure, filled with small victories and quiet joys. One afternoon, Jack decided to take Emily on a ride across the prairie, showing her a hidden valley he had discovered years ago. The valley was surrounded by hills, with a small stream running through it and wildflowers carpeting the ground. Jack had never brought anyone here before, not even in the early years with his family. It felt personal, sacred. "Jack, it's beautiful," Emily said softly, taking in the view. "I can see why you love this place so much." Jack smiled, feeling a connection deeper than he had imagined. "It's more than just the land," he said. "It's about the life it allows you to live, the freedom, the quiet, and now, the companionship." Emily reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. Jack felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling of peace and happiness he hadn't experienced in decades. In that moment he realized that love didn't have to be perfect or instantaneous. It could be steady, patient, and strong, like the land itself. As the summer progressed, Jack and Emily continued to build a life together. They shared meals, worked the land, and spent evenings by the fire talking about dreams, past experiences, and hopes for the future. Jack introduced Emily to the town's neighbors, who welcomed her warmly. She fit seamlessly into his life, not as an outsider, but as someone who had always belonged. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant colors over the prairie, Jack and Emily sat on the porch watching Ranger play in the yard. Jack turned to Emily, his heart full, and said, "Emily, I want to thank you for coming into my life, for being patient, for showing me that it's never too late to love, to trust, and to hope. You've changed everything for me." Emily smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "And you've changed my life too, Jack. You've shown me that true strength and love can be found in the simplest things, in hard work, in patience, and in caring for someone completely." Jack held her close, feeling the weight of his past lighten with each passing moment. He realized that the 20 years of solitude had not been wasted. They had shaped him into someone ready to love, ready to trust, and ready to embrace life fully. And now, with Emily by his side, the prairie felt brighter, the work lighter, and the days filled with laughter, companionship, and quiet contentment. The ranch, once a symbol of isolation and loneliness, had transformed into a home filled with warmth, love, and possibility. The fences they repaired together were no longer just physical structures. They were symbols of the connection, trust, and partnership they had built. Every morning Jack woke with a sense of purpose beyond survival. He woke with hope, companionship, and a shared life he had once thought impossible. As the stars appeared in the clear night sky, Jack and Emily sat on the porch together, Ranger curled at their feet. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, quiet and peaceful. Jack reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from loss and solitude to companionship and love. He realized that life's greatest surprises often came quietly, patiently, and without warning. And sometimes they arrived in the form of someone unexpected, someone who could change your world forever. Jack Thompson, the cowboy who had spent 20 years alone, had discovered a second chance at life, love, and happiness. And as he held Emily's hand, feeling her warmth and her presence, he knew that the future was no longer something to face alone. Together they would continue to work the land, care for the cattle, and enjoy the quiet beauty of the prairie. But most importantly, they would face life side by side, sharing laughter, companionship, and a love that had been long delayed, but was now finally beautifully present. And as the fire burned low, the stars twinkled above, and the prairie whispered in the night breeze, Jack felt a sense of peace and joy that he had not known in decades. Life had surprised him in the most wonderful way, and for the first time in 20 years, he was truly happy, not just in the land he loved, but in the heart he had opened again.